Krikzz recently posted a new core for the N64 Everdrive X5 and X7 that allows you to play NES games on your N64 console using the FPGA and those Everdrives. Let's check out how it works and how the games run. Of course, there are plenty of ways to emulate the NES, basically no real shortage of them, but there is something fun about playing these games on the N64, a reimagining of that launch where we had backwards compatibility or re-releases of NES classics. Originally, the N64 Everdrives were able to use the Neon emulator, and it could be loaded onto the Nintendo 64 using a few different devices. Prior to the 2.0 version, many considered this a novelty and not a way you'd want to experience NES games, and to be fair, prior to 2.0, it was pretty messy. But recently, I've certainly enjoyed it and used it for streaming and video capture on several occasions. Sure, it was just software emulation, but it was a quick and convenient way to get a mostly authentic looking experience through something I already had hooked up in my chain. Especially when I was using a regular RetroTink 2X, as the S-Video was certainly an improvement over composite at 480p when being scaled up for streaming. Sure, I could have loaded ROMs on plenty of other systems or computers, but dropping them on the SD card in my Everdrive 64, and like I said, not changing my system layout or connections was just as simple as it could be. Now, I'm not going to tell you the original Neon emulator is super accurate or defend it as a replacement for anything, but I think it overall got a bad reputation for something that wasn't worthwhile, but it did exactly what it set out to do as a fun way to play NES games. I had to patch a game or two when the palette wasn't compatible, but that was the biggest issue I ever had with it, and with all the mini palettes on the NES, it still isn't that uncommon anyway. The new version Krikzz referred to as a core, much in the same way you would hear someone talk about a core on Mr. And that's because it uses the FPGA in the X5 and X7 ED64 and apparently will be more cycle accurate than the Neon. Though currently it is basically in a testing phase and likely to have some compatibility issues. It's a simple replacement for the Neon emulator if you've already loaded it in your Everdrive. Just drop the nes.b64 file into your EMU folder in the main ED64 folder on your SD card and let it replace the original one. If you've never messed with this before, just make the folder if needed and place the file there. Once that is taken care of, you can just drop your totally legitimate files onto your Everdrive, much like you would on any other one. I like to have a folder called NES and then organize them from there. The Everdrive will know what to do once you load up any NES ROM and you're golden. As I said, I think the best use for this is for something like streaming or for anyone with limited space or inputs in their setup. Or maybe you've got a CRT setup and want to keep things minimal. There are a billion ways to emulate the NES, but this is at least the benefit of eliminating a system, especially if you are going fully analog. It also offers something a little closer in aesthetics to an original NES, but still with a little signal bump since you have S-Video stock on the N64. Plus, the D-pad on an N64 controller is basically the same as an SNES controller, and the button layout is rather nice for playing NES games. The shoulder button replaces the select if you were curious. Plus, there's no lag, or at least none that I can tell. It seems very responsive. I think the N64 controller is really comfortable when playing NES games. Of course, what good is all this talk if I don't do a few side-by-side comparisons? I'll be stacking my stock N64 via composite and S-Video up against my stock NES composite into my Tink 5X Pro. No scan lines, no smoothing, no effects at all from the Tink. So let's get an idea how each stack up at a base level, and then with that little boost while still unmodded. S-Video from the N64 is of course way cleaner than the NES, but of course with the smoothing or blur, however you want to call it, on the whole thing thanks to the hardware of the N64 and what it does to its own signal. But it looks great in all aspects when looking at it in a bubble. As I said earlier, using this to stream or for a quick capture, I've never seen anything crazy wrong. But I've been emulating NES games since the 90s, and you kind of just get used to some of the warts from that. Once you put it side by side, you can start seeing some stark differences between the two. While some colors are close to each other, there is the stark difference between the blue of the skies in Super Mario. This is not an uncommon problem in emulating the NES. Mario's red and the green on the pipes are much closer to each other though, same with the browns and other earthy colors. The aspect ratio is the other glaring issue. Everything is just a little fatter, stretched on that horizontal. The N64 is running at 263 and the NES is 256, so it isn't surprising. It is nice though that using the N64 gets rid of the overscan and fills more of the screen. If you're okay with Mario with a little more junk in his overalls, you may not even mind this difference. It isn't as bad as stretching the image to 16:9 or anything like that. You can see similar things with Castlevania, though no stark color differences. Maybe the green is a little on the darker side, or maybe things are just more muted in general. You can kind of really see that in the orange on Belmont's clothes. This is basically results across the board. Some color differences varying in severity, and if you ever mess with the RGB palettes versus composite in emulation or via modding, you're probably used to this difference. Audio seems to be on pretty equal footing across the board. There should be less in the way of recreating that. But once again, this is still in testing, so you may run into some issues. But here are a couple more side-by-side comparisons so you can see for yourself without me blabbing the whole time. Now, composite is about the same result, though a messier signal compared to S-Video, of course. The color difference is there too. That sky in Super Mario is always so telling. The aging NES hardware, and mine specifically, can be a messy composite signal, but it doesn't take a lot to clean it up using good scanline filters on something like the RetroTank 5X. But raw, the NES on the N64 can certainly be a little more pleasing to the eye. If you can stand the blur the hardware puts on the signal, that is. For everything else, slowdown and sprite flicker or glitches and errors, I didn't do a deep dive of the very large library on the NES. From my time with the Neon and a small collection of titles with this new version, I haven't run into anything drastic, like where things didn't feel right or a glitch I had never seen before. Everything feels decently authentic overall. I doubt you'll load up a game and have anything feel wrong. But Krikzz did mention that some system components are running in an overclocked mode, which may cause some compatibility issues. So don't be shocked if you come across something. If you're wondering, no, there aren't any other enhancements like save states or scaling, nothing like that. If a game originally saves to the card, it will save to the SD card just like any N64 game on that Everdrive, which is probably the biggest downside to it compared to using your hacked Wii or something similar using software emulation. But again, I'm not trying to sell anyone on one way being better than another. I just think this is a fun concept. The Neon emulator and now this FPGA solution provides a what if into how neat it could have been if Nintendo released an NES collection on a single cart, had some sort of NES player adapter, or even released something like the e-reader like they did with the Game Boy Advance. But I've always had fun using my Nintendo 64 to play NES games. Sure, it isn't perfect, there are plenty of ways to emulate these classic Nintendo titles, I cannot state it enough, but one more way certainly doesn't hurt. So if you tried using the Neon emulator or this new core on your N64 yet, what do you think about it? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, I'll see you next time. Hey, this is Kevin, once again thanking you so much for watching another episode of RetroActive. If you liked it, please hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, all the stuff I'm supposed to say, and I also want to remind you that I do have a Ko-fi account and a Discord. Links will be in the description. Bye!